Alright, so I thought I would start this video with this. So I've tried to emphasize this in a number of ways. What I'm talking about isn't some fancy thing, some other thing. I'm not talking about a something else. I'm not talking about some elusive, mysterious, spiritual thing that's fantastic and different to what's going on right now. What I'm talking about in these videos is the most obvious, ordinary, mundane, simple thing possible, which is, you know, when that becomes clear, it'll just be like, oh, okay, that's what all this is. The spirituality thing. Is that what all this is about? Is that all? And in a way, it's like it's a relief, but it's also disappointing because people make a thing of it, and the thing of it is not this. It's somewhere else. It's a something else, and that's not what I'm talking about. That's also why I find it kind of funny when I get critical comments, because it's always under the assumption that maybe this character here doesn't represent an idea of uh, or an expectation about the subject of spirituality. And I find it funny because what I'm talking about is so normal. It's so not a thing. It's so not a something else, or not some idea about what spirituality is or what awakening is. It's simple. It's just experience. That all I'm talking about is your own experience, and in that way, it's so not fantastic. It's so normal. Um, but in that realization, then there is the appreciation of life as something fantastic, or experience as something inherently fantastic. So the whole assumption about awakening being something fantastic as awakening is, based on life, just life the way it is, the mystery of life. So, especially in the comment that I'm gonna answer in this video is, I'm not talking about some fantastic thing that awaits you, or some personal quality that this character you see here has or is going to teach you. It's not like that. It's so much more obvious than that, and almost in a way, the the presumption that this channel kind of might be taken in that way, that I'm talking about something. I'm talking about something else, an awakening that's not here, a spiritual experience is not this. There's the fundamental flaw with this channel. And what I would say is, it's hard to talk about these things, and I'm not talking about a thing. I'm not talking about something else. If you can, don't make a thing of it. Don't make it's a something else about of it. What I'm talking about is your experience. Is just the experience. Is just life, and that's all I'm talking about. And it's kind of hard to get past that presumption that I'm talking about something called awakening that you're gonna get and it's gonna be awesome. Because when you get it, that illusion is gone with it. The hope of what it's gonna do for me when I get it is gone when you get it, and you're like, oh, is that all this is about? And then you can start living, and that's about that's all this is about. So just getting closer to experience, getting closer to your experience of yourself is all I'm talking about, and it's not some fantastic conceptual thing in the future. But anyway, on to the video. Okay, so I had a nice weekend there. My wife and the kids were away for a weekend, so I had a weekend to myself. So I went out to the country park and just sat in a field for a bit, for quite a while, and it was really quite a nice experience. Just solitude and quietness and a bit of nature. It's funny how my idea of a good time now is just sitting in a field for many hours. But that's fine. So, answering comment, Lindsay asks, can you please touch on spiritual bypassing versus letting thoughts and or sensations just be as they are? Is there validity in looking at reoccurring thoughts and emotions? So I'm not really sure what spiritual bypassing is, to be honest. I guess it would be the sense of self co-opting the whatever sort of inquiry or meditation or whatever, which just constantly happens up until awakening. But it's not like it's hard to say that that's done. It happens automatically. So the difference here would be letting thoughts be as they are. So it depends on what kind of relationship there is with thought. Does it feel like I am a thinker having thoughts? Maybe having a thought about what to do about thoughts. Does that really feel like that's a real experience that's happening, that's going on? Me relating to my thoughts. What should I do about them? Because that's a thought relating to itself. You know, the sense of the subject, the me, the thinker. You could say it itself is a contextual thought. It's like the subject of my thoughts. I'm having a thought experience that says this and that. What should I do about thoughts? That's very different to experiencing thought. You know, when there's that position of the subject in relation to thoughts, then there will be a belief about, you know, it's important, what I should do about this is important, and how I approach this is important, and I need to figure this out, and it's important to me. All of that kind of stuff. It's much more, I would say, about feeling out what that whole circuit feels like, what that whole experience of me, the thinker, feels like. What is its kind of signature feeling and pattern? How does it feel? It feels like me. It feels like I've got to figure something out. It feels urgent. Feels like I need to get something. I don't have something already, that something's not complete. And getting used to the feeling of that. Am I looking from that thinker? Am I looking from that subjective position and then trying to sort thoughts out as the subject of my thoughts? Or are they just thoughts? And when there are just thoughts, it's kind of like when there's not a strong belief of buy-in to what the thoughts are saying and how that relates to me, the meditator. It's very different experientially, it's very, very different energetically, and it just gets simple. It gets really simple that way, and you get familiar with the For one, well, sorry, I'll complete that. You get familiar with the energetic signature of me, the thinker, the self, the subject that relates to my thoughts, that relates to a thought experience as me. It becomes, you feel it out, and then eventually it becomes exposed as one repetitive as fuck. It's just automatic. It doesn't have agency in the way that you thought it was. It's just a recurring, almost like habitual pattern, and it has a feeling tone to it that's familiar but uncomfortable. And you notice that appear whenever there's a relationship with thought. I relate to my thoughts. It feels that way, and then when you, I'm kind of mapping this out a bit too much, but when you feel that out, when it's obvious that, I would describe it for myself like this: the subject, the thinker, the self, co-arises with any objective thought, suggested in the context of that thought, and there's a feeling tone to it. Me relating to my thought, or it might even seem, if you really identified, me relating to the world, past and the future, until you kind of, clarify things to the extent where you see that the me, the thinker, relates only to thought about experience. It's based on experience, based on, for the most part, a fictional reality inside the head, and it gets closer and closer and closer, and then eventually that whole circuit just gets exposed for what it is. And it was the me that was relating to thought that was the thing that was sticky about it. And when you see that that's another thought, then you don't have to believe it anymore. Or I could say there's no you that's believing it anymore. There's no you that's relating to thought. It just becomes clear from no particular position that was all just thought. Then it gets so simple when the search is over, and you might see repetitive thought patterns come up with this feeling tone of the thinker, the me, the subject in there. And I say you might see this as if you see this from a position, but this thought experience just becomes apparent to itself, and you see that there's no you here relating to thought. It's not even like that. It's much more paradoxical than that. There's just thought, and when it's really seen that there's just thought, then that you just loses all believability, and then it's just thought or not thought. And then when that habitual pattern of thinking relating to thoughts as a thinker loses its power, it's much easier just to stay in a space of presence. There doesn't need to be a thought. There doesn't need to not be a thought. It tends to quiet down a lot because, the thought's not bouncing about trying to figure things out about life and me and how I relate to things and so on. It just gets simple. But it's very difficult to describe. It's very difficult to bypass that filter of this guy on YouTube telling me about, maybe suggesting something that I should do along the lines of inquiry. It's very difficult to bypass that me, that thinker, that one who wants to take this information and do something with it. I'm not talking to that one necessarily. I'm talking to I don't know what I'm talking to, but it's not the identity in full anyway. It's not the thinker. The thinker, the me, can't do anything with what I'm talking about because it only functions in subject object. Me relating to thought, me relating to my experience, me as something separate from my experience, my thoughts relating to them. And from that position, there's always something to do. There's always something to chase. When that becomes clear, that thinker just it's just a vague suggestion in the context of the objective thought. It's just suggested in that context that I'm the thinker relating to this thought narrative. There's nothing there that's real that you can call the thinker, and the more you try and look for it, the less you find it. And then that's just the whole thing. That's the whole thing. So it's never confirmed by the me, the thinker, that yes, I have found enlightenment, I have found awakening. That's why you should be wary of anyone who claims enlightenment, awakening as a personal quality or a personal experience, describes himself as an enlightened person. You know, their language is tricky sometimes, but it's nothing to do with the person. It's nothing to do with a personal quality or a personal experience, or it's not like you as the thinker, the character, are going to be present there when the absence of you, the thinker, is confirmed to the thinker. It's much more simple than that, and that's why it's so difficult to describe, because the mind can't do anything with this. That's why it sounds so vague. But there's something in you that can feel what I'm talking about, and that's what I'm talking to, which is the same thing that which I guess it's not a thing, but it's the same obviousness of experience, that the thinker isn't actually there's no little person in here that's real, that persists across time, relating to a real world. That becomes clear. I can't explain how, but it just becomes clear. That reality becomes clear to itself. The nature of reality as it is, let's say, which isn't actually any way, becomes more obvious to reality, to itself. There's no person in here, that the thinker, that can confirm that and says, oh, now I confirm that the thinker is a thought. It just doesn't work like that. Thankfully, it's much more simple than that. What was the other part of the thing? Run out of battery here. Is there validity in looking at reoccurring thoughts and emotions? Depends where you're looking from. It depends if you're looking from the one who relates to them as the thinker. I suppose there's validity in anything, but you know, as the subject, when these reoccurring thoughts come up, if you continue to look at it as the subject, the same pattern, the same identity persists, seems to persist. If there's a disidentification from that, sorry, I'm going to have to look at that again, reoccurring thought narrative, as in, it just doesn't seem so believable when it's seen again, and then again it might not seem as believable anymore, and then the one that's believing it seems a bit less believable. And then it just gets more and more simple, and it's just clear that that was just a bunch of thoughts. There's no one in here trying to figure this out that's going to get it. Thankfully, otherwise it would be impossible. It's just a paradox. You just let go, disidentify, notice it for what it is, just a thought. Become interested in what a thought is, like not what it's talking about, not the one that's watching the thought or the one that's thinking, just what is this thought that keeps appearing in experience, and just get more and more interested in that. And then what becomes more interesting is actually just the experience of thought, not the subject matter, not the subject or the object that's being talked about in that thought narrative as the content. What becomes more interesting is just the experience, And then experience just continues to become more and more interesting immediately, not in some narrative about me and how I relate to it, just experience. And that's a summary of this entire thing. It doesn't have to get more complicated than that. Just interested in experience with a genuine interest, a genuine openness to see what is going on. What is this me that I feel like I am that continues to struggle with thought or a version of reality inside my head, seemingly? Just keep looking at that. I suppose you would say spiritual bypassing is the co-opting of that by the self, but that can only exist in thought. Just keep looking at the thought, and don't believe any of the thought. Don't believe that you don't believe the thought, but just you don't have to believe any of the thought, because that's not required. Yeah, I would summarize it like just being interested in experience, and it starts with thought because that makes up a huge amount of our experience to begin with, and then eventually it gets very interesting. Me as the thinker gets interesting, and that's when this all kind of kicks off. That's when it all starts dismantling itself, when you start looking from no particular position at what this thinker self is, what this me thinking is. Something paradoxical happens, and something about what you think you are changes, and it's very hard to describe what that is. You know, I've tried describing it, as you can see, in many different ways, but if it's not getting more simple, if it's not getting if you really feel like a me, you really feel like the one struggling with thought, if there's no relief in there somewhere from the one who's on this path, the one who's thinking, the thinker, then I would suggest that it might be getting co-opted by the me, the thinker. If it's getting more simple, if it's getting easier to sit in presence, if it's getting easier to not grab onto the thoughts, or not struggle with your experience, trying to make it something else, or trying to get something called enlightenment, I would say that's a good sign. But anyway, I think that'll do for now. I'll talk to you next time.